Science. That's going to be the feature of today's episode. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, and last, but certainly not least, all of you with confirmation bias. You will find what you're looking for. It's inevitable. You're listening to Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix, a family-friendly podcast. Jeez, man, we are struggling on this one here, where we logically speculate on life. Trigger warning for this episode, I'd say it's just probably a logical conversation. A lot of you are probably going to get triggered because I'm going to point out some long-held beliefs that you may have held that you're going to realize in the flow of this series here might not actually be fact. And so there might be a little hurt feelings over that. I do this to have a conversation. I'm not doing this to offend anyone or to... I don't want to trigger anyone, but we've also got to have a logical conversation, right, Trace? And there's some stuff in the standard model that just needs to be talked about how it's not as certain as a lot of scientists tend to present it, or at least in terms of how it gets presented in the school systems and by people external of the science system. You might have your own thoughts on that as we dive in, and I welcome those, and I'm excited to hear it. But before we get to that, I'm struggling. I'm struggling today. Yeah. How about you give us your fish fact here, and I'll compose myself. I'll go get some therapy real quick.
Okay. So this is a little bit of a request here, but the horseshoe crab, which is most commonly known as like a prehistoric kind of animal that survived till today. So we're going to do a little facts. I know I've been doing a few of them in the last couple episodes, but I don't think I mentioned this one, is that they have two compound eyes, which is what you would normally think is of their eyes. If you look at a picture of them, they have these little like, they just look like eyes pretty much. And then they have 10 different eyes that help them see light. So a lot of marines, probably not even marine species as well, but a lot of marine species have like special eyes that just sense light and dark. Like jellyfish, they have those kind of eyes. I will also say I think there will be another fish fact coming up later in this discussion.
I expect nothing less. Gotta have fish facts.
Yeah.
I will say that I definitely can understand the compounded eye. That's what our guest Harrison Smith did when he kneed me in the face when we were doing martial arts a couple months back. So Harrison, if you're listening, that's a call out for you there. If he never listens to this episode, then he'll just never know.
Fake fan, really.
What?
Fake fan, really.
Yeah, he is a fake fan, isn't he? But he's a guest, so I gotta wait until the end, and then I gotta pick his argument apart like cotton candy. No,
okay.
I'm kidding. All right. Well, so Trace, you are familiar with bats, I assume, yes? Like their anatomy and everything, not just familiar with bats in general. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. I'm actually like asking, like, are you familiar with like bats, like wings anatomy specifically?
More or less. Flying foxes used to be my favorite animal. They're still up there. Okay.
So then you would probably be able to confirm then that bats' wings are just basically filling in like of skin between their fingers, elongated fingers, if you will, yes?
Yeah, it's like a webbing between their fingers.
So what you're saying is that bats fly with jazz hands.
You got me there.
All right, I figured that'd be a good little snippet to throw in here as we talk about holes in the standard model. I wrote this episode content like 2 months ago, and it's been a long 2 months. So I don't really remember much of what I wrote into this, not this script, but this general idea. So I have no clue how this episode is going to go. It's already off to a really rough start, already butchered the intro there like 3 different times. So, science.
That's what we're talking about.
That's what we're talking about. All right, so let's start off here. How do you think evolution limits our thinking or our scientific research, Trace?
I wouldn't say so.
I would disagree. I think it does. I think that the evolutionary model gives us a model that most people are comfortable with. And because people are comfortable with that model, they don't want to explore anything that could contradict it. Instead of new contradicting facts getting set against the evolutionary theory, there's massive attempts to synergize it into the evolutionary theory. I think models are good to have. You have to have models, to do science. You have to have a model and a framework to look at the world. But you should not be so set and attached to your model that you don't ask questions. And then we kind of touched on this a little bit in the last episode, talking about Serpent Mound and the Tic Tac, idea that you presented, the portal idea you presented, the meteor idea I presented. From an evolutionary perspective, all of these are out of the question. But I think the listeners, if they've looked up that Serpent Mound depiction, I could see validity to your claim about that being a Tic Tac. I actually had the vague thought in the back of my mind. I just didn't mention it on air. And then you connected that to a portal, and I'm like, this is perfect. So, I mean, there's any number of things, but we're limited in our ability to ask questions if we adhere too staunchly to any one system, specifically the evolutionary system, because it prohibits certain questions, because we know, quote unquote, know when the meteor struck. So therefore we know that the ancients didn't see that meteor, but in reality, we don't know.
Well, yeah, which we never really will.
And that's the point, yeah.
My question is, what questions are it prohibiting?
I think it prohibits these kind of questions, because these kind of questions, for those that staunchly, that determinedly adhere to the evolutionary theory, or any theory for that matter, might instantly, you could say the same thing about Christians as well. If you adhere too strictly to like a classical Christian worldview, you might miss some things. You might just ignore certain things and be like, no, that doesn't fit my worldview, therefore it's not real. When it very well could be real, and it could be trying to tell you that your worldview is not as accurate as you think.
That's fair.
So that's my proposal here as we kick off the show. It also, the evolutionary theory suggests that we are the most evolved as we've ever been. We are the pinnacle of evolution currently, if you will. That is the premise that's put forward to some degree or another, whether it's blatantly said or whether it's more inferred. And so the evolutionary theory defies this idea of ancient humans actually having technology, being smart, constructing things with technology that maybe we don't even have. And so it keeps us close-minded to things like the pyramids. The pyramids, when initially I bought into they're just tombs. I don't know how much you've studied the pyramids. We might need to we'll do some episodes on that, definitely. But the pyramids, they weren't tombs. There was something more to them. Just with all the effort, the astronomical alignment, the precision of creating it, the precision used, I think, is more precise than our construction standard right now, in fact. I could be wrong on that because I'm speaking off the hip. So I just think that we need to be careful when looking at science and thinking things are absolute fact that scientists say. Unless it's testable and observable in real time, we should take it with multiple grains of salt. At least that's my perspective. Maybe you disagree.
No, I think I would agree to just not just 100% believe things.
Yeah, for sure. So, Trace, I realized that I had a whole bunch of follow-ups to do. And I just started doing the episode content, and I didn't do any of the follow-ups. So do you think we should stop right now, do a whole bunch of tangential follow-ups, and then continue? Or do you think that we should do that like the end of the episode? What are your thoughts?
I have no idea what kind of follow-ups you have. So.
A lot. Oh, corrections from previous episodes on myself, mostly. I'm talking crap in other episodes, and so I got to go back and correct myself. Wrong 60% of the time, right 40% of the time. I guess I'll just do it now. So that was your little preface and taste, if you will, into the episode we're doing here. But now let's go back. First thing I realized, I was listening to the end of the last episode on the Serpent Mound and Ark Encounter, and I realized I gave our social media handle as m.quad.musings@gmail.com. That is not, in fact, our social media handle.
I feel like people understand.
Yeah, but no, our social media handle is m.quad.musings, and the email is m.quad.musings@gmail.com. So I had to clear that one up right off the bat. I was also listening to episode 10 that released on July 10th, and I realized I said, oh my gosh, but I moved away from the mic as I said gosh, and it really sounds like I said oh my god. I did not say oh my god. So I said oh my gosh, just going to clarify that right now. I'm not, that was, yeah. I'm just got to clarify that, so for our listeners. But, so I apologize if you thought I was saying that. Not what I was saying. What else? So I was irritated that I couldn't remember from the last episode as well. What exactly, I can hear you dragging the mic.
Oh, oops.
I realized from the last episode, I got irritated because I didn't exactly remember what the derivative definition was. So it's not a tangent line, it's the slope of the tangent line to that. So I just want to clarify that as well. I know I'm nitpicking a little.
These are such tiny little follow-ups.
Hey man, attention to detail is key.
Next, just interrupt the entire flow of the episode to bring up, oh, sorry guys, I didn't mean to say Gmail at the end of that.
I mean, fair. Next thing, you're not allowed to apologize for tangents anymore because tangents are how we learn. So I want you to bring up tangents. Our podcast is going to be a derivative podcast. We're going to do tangents. So
I'll just start saying some wild stuff. Just
okay.
like
I guess I asked for
out
that.
of nowhere.
I guess I asked for that. All right, so you did also mention horseshoe crabs in episode 10, so I was wrong as well from our last episode when I said you didn't do that as a fish fact.
I thought I did.
You mentioned it as a second fish fact, and that's what threw me off. But no, you were right. I was wrong, so you don't get to hear that too often. All right, this one's actually a useful one. I looked into that claim of the Ark being found in Ararat a little bit more. The guy, you can find him, he goes by Joseph Z, just Z as the last name. I don't know if it's a pseudonym or if it's his actual last name, but I think his Instagram handle is official Joseph Z or something along those lines. But it wasn't LiDAR, they used ground penetrating radar to actually create a 3D model of the cavities in the Ark, and there were multiple, and I think it was right angles. That's what it was. There were actually right angles in the map that they created. So that shows that it wouldn't have very likely been just a natural forming cave. It would be very unlikely for it to be a natural forming cave that has multiple right angles inside of it.
This is the video you sent me?
No, this is the video of the Ark being found on Mount Ararat, supposedly. So I did want to follow up on this because we did talk about it last episode.
Well, the one thing you sent me, they also mentioned they gave the radar test to a completely unrelated scientist, and they were like,
okay, yeah,
hey,
I did
a
send
tunnel
it to you.
here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Man, today's an off day. Do you want to lead this episode? Just read my jarbled notes.
I probably know the same amount as you do with your notes.
Okay, so let's jump back into the episode content here. But first, we are due for an ad break. So let's take that real quick, and I can gather my mental sanity. All right, ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, I think I have collected myself to function for this episode, but we shall see. So let's kick off this discussion again here from my disjointed, disorganized chaos, talking about the standard model outline of evolution. Yeah, most of you have heard it already, but let's just, I get it. People learned it in high school, but we're just going to hit the highlights real quick here, just so everyone has a base understanding of what we're kind of looking at. The general concept is that early life formed 3.8 billion years ago, evolved to multicellular life 1.5 billion years ago, and then you have early animals evolving, then fish and amphibians, reptiles and mammals, first primates, and then you have the hominins evolving, and then finally leading down to about 10,000 years ago kicked off the Neolithic revolution. And so that's generally the standard model of the evolutionary time frame condensed down into 20 seconds. Just so you kind of have a general understanding of what we're looking at. It goes back as far as 3.8 billion years ago. So I'm going to clarify for this episode, I'm not trying to disprove evolution, okay? I am simply trying to highlight some inconsistencies and holes in the evolutionary theory to provoke thought and discussion. So again, don't let this trigger you. I am presenting my thoughts to fuel a conversation.
Or do get triggered. It makes for some pretty funny comments on social media.
It does. It absolutely does. It's, if you email a show and you're doing ad hominem attacks, I am definitely going to make fun of you on the show. Just saying. If you do ad hominem, I'll do ad hominem back. That's kind of been my principle on social media and on here as well, even though we haven't gotten any listener communications yet.
I did see a comment on one of your videos that just said no. Like, oh yeah, good argument there.
Real logical discussion right there. Yeah, just no. Yeah, it's like, yeah, that was really insightful. Thank you for that. All right. So this comes from Brothers of the Serpent, episode 322. They talked about the topic of schools teach you what to think, not how to think. I think that is a very profound and fantastic claim. So thank you to Kyle and Russ and whoever your guest was in that episode, because I don't remember, but very insightful discussion to have there, and I agree entirely. And that is our intent in this podcast, is to, for you listeners out there, to kind of help, maybe not teach you to think if you know how to think, but if you don't, to help you along in that process and to fuel your thoughts with some insights backed by science and just off the wall speculation all jammed into one. So, there are some problems, for example, with like peer review, especially. Some peer review articles can be great, but peer review has actually changed from what it originally was supposed to be. It's currently incredibly strict. There's very biased constraints onto what studies get published, and oftentimes you are only allowed to submit to one specific article, like publisher, and if they decide to reject it, which will usually take them 8 to 10 months, then you've got to resubmit or submit to another one, and then they'll make you wait a couple months and reject it. So the peer review process, it can be good in certain areas. It's good to have peers in your field review your work. But from my understanding of the peer review process is it was never made to actually, it was never made to actually discriminate against, it was never made to discriminate against ideas. It was made more to, It was made more to just kind of filter out redundancy of information, I think, because that was kind of the original intent of the peer reviews, to make sure that articles on the exact same topics weren't getting published over and over again. It was to promote novel ideas, not to approach the idea with your own confirmation bias as to, I'm going to accept or reject this article because I agree with it or I disagree with it. And that is certainly how I think at least some people in the peer review world will approach their peer-reviewed articles. Now, obviously, there's going to be exceptions to that because we're speaking broadly here about a human beings collectively. So, and then you also have like funding biases where studies will only get funded if they find certain things that are desired. And I think we've talked about this a good bit before, Trace, and that's an expected limitation of the peer review process, but it's a limitation that doesn't get talked about much. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the peer review process is good, but it has limitations as well, where it can lead to some discrimination or bias against certain information or studies because that idea seems too fringe. Does that make sense so far? Do you disagree?
No, I would agree. I just want to say from everything I've heard, it's just kind of the peer review process in itself, instead of, like, it's not just the discrimination kind of stuff, it's just that it's complicated in general. So, like, I completely lost my train of thought, to be honest.
Another thing I'll say, too, if you collect your thoughts, apparently I'm not the only one that's disjointed in this episode.
Yeah.
Another thing I'll say as well, and I just lost my thought. Shoot, you're contagious, Trace. It's affecting me. Yeah, I totally. Oh, right. So, also, academic study is a little overrated, I think. Everyone places high emphasis on credentials, and credentials can be good, and it can say you're a subject matter expert. you don't have to go to school to be an expert in a subject. You can actually have, in my opinion, I think you can sometimes be a more proficient expert than people that have gone to school. Because again, schools teach you what to think, not how to think. And so that's why people like Elon Musk have actually started hiring people that don't have degrees, but that go out and learn on their own and can demonstrate their own competencies. Because that drive to learn is exponentially more valuable and exponentially adds more to you as a person in your competency than just being fed information and then regurgitating it.
I want to say Elon Musk is the greatest example of competency.
Okay. All right. To each their own, I guess. Science has limitations, though. Science is a fantastic tool. Dude, I love science. I was just, we'll talk about this in the next episode, but I was nerding out with you like 2 days ago about the quantum study that was done. And
yes.
Yeah, that was talking about how there's more than one dimension to time and there's a mathematical model that might demonstrate that. Dude, that was blowing my mind. I was nerding. I was so excited. I'm like, I'm really getting excited over math and over an abstract concept. Like,
meanwhile, for me, it was just going like right over my head.
Yeah. Next episode, we're going to talk about quantum physics. I'm going to explain it in really simple levels, at least hopefully, as simply as I can. And then we're going to talk about, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about quantum physics. Next episode is going to be quantum. This one's just regular science. Next one's going to be quantum science. Okay. So there are bounds on science. Science, by its nature, is testing and observation and being able to predict stuff. The problem, and that's a great model. That's a very straightforward, hey, I need to be able to see stuff and then I can demonstrate it, I can prove it, and then that means I can predict it. There is law and there is order to it. Has to be. So it's a fantastic, I love science, seriously. But it has limitations. When you try to take it and apply it to things in ancient times in the past, when we don't know all the factors that contributed to things, like geographical shifts, you try to put a specific date on it, but you don't have all the variables for your equation, you are making guesses and assumptions, and you are moving outside of the regular bounds of science, if you will. You are moving more into, I guess I want to call it speculative science in a sense, because you are speculating and you're hypothesizing in ways that cannot ever absolutely be proven and tested and observed, because you can't go back and test and observe Mount St. Helens erupting because we don't have time travel. Do you see what I'm kind of saying here, Trace? Do you agree?
Yeah. I mean, the entire paleontology thing is just more or less speculation.
Exactly. And then things get left up to artistic depictions as well, and that's its own nightmare. As well, I'm going to talk about that, but I'm going to kick the floor over to you when we get to that section, because I think you'll have more to share than me.
Probably.
So, yeah, there's a difference between like speculative or historical science, if you will, in contrast to like us doing a chemical reaction right here, right now in front of us, being able to observe it and then being able to report those findings, tell them to you as a listener, and then you as a listener can go out and do the same experimentation. Like, we know that baking soda and vinegar, you mix them together, they fizz, and if you put them in a contained space, the bottle will burst or whatever. So that's something that's testable and observable. Forensic science in historical science is a bit different. So forensic science is also a thing, but we also have to keep in mind that forensic science usually deals with more recent events, in contrast to claims about things millions and millions of years ago. And so we can't equate forensic science, doing studies on things 50, 100, 150, 200 years to predicting things millions and millions of years ago, or even thousands of years ago from science. It's apples to oranges. That's a logical fallacy. That would be the overgeneralization fallacy, I think, actually. So bear that in mind. So the standard model, it's believed that most science of the universe had an absolute beginning. There's some debate on that, but we will get to that in the quantum physics episode, because a lot of scientists such as Stephen Hawking actually have theories based on quantum physics for the origins of the universe, which is why I want to talk about quantum physics. I see why in Ant-Man they kept making the joke, do you guys just slap the word quantum in front of everything? Quantum, don't let the word quantum threaten you. It's basically just, you could remove the word quantum and everything else would still make sense in quantum physics. It's basically just physics in a bit more of an abstract sense. But anyway,
That's a bold claim that it would still make sense.
Okay, it makes sense to me. Maybe not to you as a peasant. I'm kidding. All right. So, creation of the universe. So if the universe had a beginning from an evolutionary perspective, so a universe came from nothing, that defies Newton's first law, conservation of energy, because then you have something coming from nothing. And that's my first point of contention with the evolutionary theory and the standard model. We'll dive into this more in the quantum physics episode. But my initial problem, I want to hit on this point now, is that the universe is theorized to have just come from nothing. Everything came from nothing at all. And that defies the laws of physics as we know them. And I've seen people try to argue that there are laws, primordial laws. So primordial would be like ancient before the existence of the universe. So primordial universe laws. It's a big fancy way of saying laws that existed before the universe was created that maybe we just don't know about or something. But again, that's even taking it further than the millions and millions of years science. That's so speculative. We don't know. It could just as easily have been a creator. It could just as easily have been a peanut butter and jelly sandwich floating around in primordial existence that created the universe. It could literally be anything. Because if you're going to say, oh, well, there's the universe being created defies the laws that we know now, but there could have been laws or rules or things that were different before. Well, then anything could have been different. We can't quantify that.
I mean, in the Norse myth, there's a primordial cow that reveals man out of a salt lake.
I honestly don't know what to do with this information.
No explanation as to where the cow came from. It's just the fact that there is a cow, and he licked a man out of a rock. So that could be true.
Yeah, I mean, but seriously though, if you are going to say from a scientific perspective, oh, the laws could have been different back then, the laws that we see now don't apply, then anything goes. If you're going to say, oh yeah, there was just different laws, then anything could go. But then if you say that the laws that we have now existed even, I don't want to say before the universe, but at the universe's creation or instigation, the millisecond the universe came into existence, if you're going to say that all those laws existed then, or even before, extending out, because there are some quantum theories about that, all of that indicates there has to be an instigator. There has to be. So it either way, the argument tips to the side of God, because you see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I want to make the argument that if not God, then just something, and that also begs the question.
Exactly, like peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If the laws that we know now are out of the question for the instigation of the universe, anything goes. And if those laws aren't out of the question, physics has a lot of explaining to do. And there are no good models that exist to explain this. There are holes in every single model. They are very abstract quantum physics concepts, but I've looked into them. I've boiled them down. They have a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of problems with them, but we'll discuss that in the next episode. Next major problem I have with evolution and the standard model. Life coming from no life. You know, there is, what's the term? Is it exogenesis or something, like life from no life? There's a specific scientific term. I'm not familiar off the top of my head. I think it's something along those.
I don't know.
Something along those lines. DNA. DNA is a language, a simplified language, but it's a language. It's information encoded, transmitted, and then decoded by another system. That is a language. We have no examples in observable science of a language coming out of stupidity or like non-intelligence. The lack of intelligence. We have no examples of this. There is no observable science to claim this. It's just, oh, this needed to happen, therefore it happened. We really have no clue. There is no scientific, like really, really good scientific explanation. Even simple cell organisms are not simple. They have a complex compilation of components that feed into them, like the phalangia. I think there's phalangia in most simple cells that help feed information or something along those lines, but they have a series of mechanics. It's not just, oh, simple cell organism, oh, that's just like literally one component. Like, no, there's a lot that even plays into that. So that's the next problem. The next major hole is that this question is not, there is really no good answer that the evolutionary theory has. It has this hole. Life is complex. it's complex. Even in the simplest form, life is exponentially complex. And in fact, DNA is impressive, man. DNA contains more information for its size in contrast to any computing system we have. So much so that like people that are designing computers, like like electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, they're actually looking into trying to use DNA to store information the way that our computers would, because it just can just store so much more per its space than like our current hard drives that we have. It's phenomenal. And yet, if we saw a hard drive, we'd be like, who made that? We saw a hard drive just laying around. Oh, who made that? Even if it's not transmitting information. Mm-hmm. But like we see DNA and we're like, oh no, happened by chance? Really?
Yeah.
So what you're telling me is if I take all the ingredients to bake a cake, I take flour and chocolate and I take a raw egg and I set everything out and I just give it enough time. The right conditions will eventually form where the wind will come and kind of stir it up. The lightning will crack open the egg. Everything will get all stirred up, and then enough lightning strikes will happen around it where it cooks it to the perfect temperature. And it just makes a cake. It would be cool to see. But I mean, can you think about that for a minute? How complex and how long that would take, and how no one would look at that and be like, "Oh, isn't that a great act of nature?" It'd be like, "Oh man, that's an act of God," right? That's how we would refer to it. So. And that's the next hole I have. Fossil record trace. That's going to be the next topic. How about we... I
wore dinosaur socks for this too. I'm very prepared.
Didn't you wear dinosaur socks to the last episode?
No, I wore shark socks.
Oh, okay. That's right. Shark socks for Shark Week. I understand. We're due for another ad break. So we're going to take a break. And you're going to bring us back in to talk about fossils.
All right. We are back. I was peer pressured into making a bunch of points.
Call it as it is. I flat out bullied you into talking about the fossil record.
I was very rushed into gathering some thoughts together. But so I'm sure some of this stuff is on Josiah's notes here to bring up. But here's just some of my simple thoughts for starters. The whole carbon dating thing, I don't really fully trust that. It gives too wide of estimates. For example, and this is the main reason I don't really trust it. I could see an argument being made for like, oh, it could be within this couple 100 million years. It's a huge time frame. We wouldn't be able to know exact years when it goes back that far.
Right.
But my issue is the Greenland shark. Here's my second fish fact.
Oh, here it comes.
The Greenland shark, really cool shark. It is probably most notably known for being one of the oldest sharks around, with them estimating it to be, can get up to, I think, a little over 500 years old. And the way they do this is they take part of the eye and they carbon date that. And the estimate's from like 250 years to 500, almost 600 years. Something along the lines of that. It's like, that's a huge estimate of time.
Yeah.
And for something that's still alive, I just don't trust that. That's way too wide. Now, I could totally believe something could live that long because they're very slow moving, stuff like that. So I feel like the physiology is there to do that, but just the carbon dating, putting it in this huge range of time for something that's right in front of us, I just can't believe it. And I think I'm probably getting those numbers wrong on my years, but I just don't believe it.
Yeah, that's fair. So we'll talk about carbon-14 dating, and then we'll kind of progress a little bit more talking about fossils specifically then. So carbon-14, it assumes a steady state decay of carbon-14. And it also assumes there are no outside influencing factors, such as a global flood, because science doesn't believe that kind of thing exists or could happen, despite there being substantial proof, I would say. So we have no way to measure or predict all of the factors that could have played into the past to measure carbon-14, or just about any other dating method for that matter. We really don't have that. We don't have that data. We don't have the information. We don't know what the factors were like. Mm-hmm. I mean, all right, so let's go really extreme here. This is going to be off the wall. I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat here for a second. Okay. What if the ancients had nuclear weapons and there was a nuclear war like thousands and thousands of years ago? that would screw up a lot of stuff, and that would make a lot of things have a lot of different like radioactive decay. That you could say the Earth is really long and really ancient, but it isn't. It could have been 20,000 years ago that man was created, and 12,000 years ago there was a massive nuclear war that kicked off the last ice age and the Younger Dryas period. I think that's Younger Dryas. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I think there's also a theory out there that like the prehistoric Earth was a lot more radioactive.
Yeah.
Than it is now, so that could.
Well, you also have to think too, like we're talking about the canopy from Genesis 1 and 2 that we discussed, and how it was probably a canopy. Then there was no rain until Genesis 6 when the flood started. You start thinking about all of this, that's going to affect the radiation that comes from the sun and is able to penetrate the atmosphere. Add that thick layer of water into the ozone layer, Trace, and you've got permanent climate control, climate change protection. Basically, you've got the Earth becomes a greenhouse. Everything's much more regulated. It's much more protected from cosmic radiation, and so you have drastic factor changes like this that just aren't accounted for because science just doesn't believe it exists or it could have existed because it's in supposed quote unquote mythological accounts. But what if these myths are telling us something? We can't just dismiss it out of pocket, out of hand. There might be truth in these myths, and we're missing that. We're ignoring this history, this tradition that's passed down. We're not even asking the questions. It's just, nope, science says that's not possible. How do you know? We don't. And that's my whole problem here with these types of dating methods. Another one, this comes from Answers in Genesis, actually. Radiocarbon lasts only about 50,000 years. So why is it then found in diamonds and fossils that are supposed to be much older than 50,000 years?
But how do we know that it only lasts 50,000 years?
That's what the standard model predicts. That's what they say. Is that I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I only had that one thought jotted down from Answers in Genesis, so I guess I'll have to dig into that.
So is that like the standard model is saying that this thing that they date back millions of years only lasts 50,000 years?
Okay, no, I think I misspoke. I think I'm looking at this here. I'm trying to think and get my thoughts because, again, I wrote this months ago. I should have reviewed more than 10 minutes before starting this episode. But I think what Answers in Genesis is saying is that radiocarbon should only be present at the decay rate to about 50,000 years. But it's found in diamonds and fossils that are supposed to be much older by other dating methods. And so that it indicates that there's errors in these type of dating methods that we're using in one or both or all. So then let's apply this to the fossil record. There is not just one, but there are dozens. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there are dozens of instances where dinosaur tissue is actually found with some of these bones. And it's not just a couple accounts. I think there's a couple dozen of these accounts.
I know of at least two. There was an ankylosaur dug up that still had a good amount of skin on it. There was a hadrosaur dug up that still had some skin on it. And there were reports of like early paleontology of them finding skin, but just throwing it away.
Yeah.
Because they didn't think it was important to keep the skin. They just wanted the bones.
Oh my gosh.
Which is infuriating.
Yeah, and I think they even found blood cells in the one T-Rex tissue they recovered some years ago. I think I saw an article about that. But yeah, so you have this problem where all of these like different tissues of animals that were supposed to be, or creatures that are supposed to be extinct for very long periods of time, all of a sudden we're finding that they have like, these bones we're recovering have tissue on them. That's supposed to decay well before we find this, if it's as old as they claim.
Well, you can make an argument that there are because not every dinosaur fossil is going to have skin tissues with it.
Oh, of course.
So there could be very specific instances of something happening that would preserve it.
Right. I can agree with that if it happened once or twice, but the fact that I've seen probably at least like 4 to 6 accounts, and I didn't even look up how many there are. I would not be surprised if there's a dozen or more. I
mean, in the grand scheme, imagine how many fossils we've dug up. For there, like, let's say there's 1,000 or like 10,000, and then you find 5 of skin tissue. It's not out of the question to say like, okay, so it's just a rare instance that something immediate could take effect that could preserve this.
Yeah, it could in some degree. You could argue maybe even the Ice Age could have done that to some degree, but for the Ice Age to have tapered down, I don't know, man. I don't buy it. Like, I think it could happen a couple times, but for the prevalence I see in these reports, it doesn't seem like that there's the probability goes down with every single find. Let me put it that way, at least in my mind.
I could see that. And
so that's another big problem that's not equated into all of these dating methods. Another thing too, fossils form quickly. That's often misunderstood. Miners' hats, stuff from like the 1940s, 1950s has been found to be fossilized. There's been fossils of, there's a classic fossil of a fish eating another fish. There's actually another fossil of a fish that was in the middle of giving birth that got fossilized that I saw at the Ark encounter. These things are indicative of a very sudden process, not a very long process. It's indicative of a natural disaster of some sort to create these conditions for a fossil or for something to be petrified. These layers in the fossil record too, they have, I think that you could argue more than one cause for it. I mean, you think about like just natural sifting that'll happen if you shake a bottle full of different sediments back and forth, then you'll have natural separation that occurs. And yet this is all just supposed to be, laid down over time, over millions and billions of years. I think there's a lot of evidence to contradict that. The biggest one that stands out in my mind, this one's from Ark Encounter as well, is erosion patterns. The erosion patterns don't match what would, if the evolutionary model is true, we would see a lot more erosion patterns and a lot more of like jagged edges in these erosion patterns displayed throughout the whole fossil record and throughout the whole, like all the fossil layers. We don't see that. They're generally consistent and flat, indicating that these are all laid down over a quick period of time. Last thing I'll say on fossils, there's a lot of bone fragments that are found that are like, oh, hey, look, we found a missing link. And they'll make a pretty artistic picture, and they'll present it as fact. And guess what? It turns out they only found part of a jawbone and a couple teeth, and they misidentified the teeth. That's the case for like Lucy and some of these other what is it? These monkey ancestors, if you will, these Neanderthal humans that they're just misclassified a lot of times, and it's from very scant data. There's not much, and they're making these assumptions. And you know what they say about assuming? Don't do it. But yeah, what do you have to say on that, Trace?
Yeah, a lot of fossils and stuff, like a lot of our dinosaur species, it's only from like a few bones here and there. So to go off of just a few bones, and a lot of times they are misidentified. Like there's a whole debate on Nanotyrannus, whether or not it's just a juvenile T-Rex or not, or if it's its own species.
Right.
Or, there's multiple cases of, like, just recently they just splitted the T-Rex species into 3 different ones as well. So there's all these kind of cases out there that, like, even in modern science today, it's just like looking back at old data and be like, something's a little off here, or okay, maybe this isn't what we thought it was. The whole Brontosaurus thing, that was the dinosaur for a while, and then they figured out, it's like, oh, well, Brontosaurus doesn't actually exist. But now I think the consensus is starting to become more of there is a Brontosaurus species out there.
Okay.
But it's everywhere you see this kind of stuff. But yeah, that's another thing I wanted to bring up too, is just like missing links. It's like, how do you go from like a Stegosaurus into what? I mean, I'm sure, there's a few like smaller stegosaur species that come up later down the line, but then how do you confidently connect those, and then like why did they just kind of disappear?
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's a lot of missing links, and we will. That's an upcoming topic here, but we're due for an ad break, so we're going to take a short break here and be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers and musers. So after reviewing all the material that we're going to be exploring, I've opted to split this episode into 2 instead of making this one really, really long episode, because we are pre-recording here a bunch of episodes, because I'm going to be gone and then Trace is going to be gone. So we we're not going to be able to record for a while, so we want to make sure there's an episode every single week. And this is one week we can do that because we're at about 45-ish minutes here. So we're going to finish up and we'll pick this conversation back up in the next episode. So Trace, go ahead and hit us with your creature fact.
All right. So the Lake Worth monster, it is right outside of Fort Worth in Texas. It is a goat man kind of creature, or possibly Bigfoot.
Stop fidgeting with stuff. If Mike can pick it up. Mr. ADHD over here.
Yeah. So anyway, there was a sighting in 1969 of a monster landing on a man's car, and later down on the line in the story, there's a lot more to the story, I'm just hitting the cliff notes here. Later down in the story, a bunch of people actually saw this thing at the top of a hill, which it threw a car tire down at them. This is mostly considered to be a half man, half goat with, strangely enough, fish scales on it.
Huh.
So one instance says that it has fish scales on it.
Huh.
There was a person that came out and said that it was a hoax. They just, they were at the top of the hill. They threw the tire down. But that still doesn't really explain the creature that jumped on the guy's car. So there could have been, this creature that came, and then people then wanted to have fun with it and went to top of the hill where a bunch of people could see them.
But that's a conclusion I feel like people come to when like looking into UFOs and everything. That's a pretty common thing I've seen, is where like it's supposed that the people that actually are faking like UFO accounts or like an angelic encounter or whatever, the people that are caught faking these things, that they probably actually had an encounter at one point and they're just trying to keep the attention and keep it going as if they are experiencing something. So that would definitely fit with human nature and human psychology, I would say. So I'd agree with that. Anything else you're wanting to discuss on that, or do you want to wrap up here?
No, I think that's all I got for right now.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, all of you out there above the earth, on the earth, or below the earth, for listening. If you want to get a hold of us, you can reach us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com if you want to email us. If you want to find us on Instagram or TikTok, you can find us at m.quad.musings. I'm still mad at you for not correcting me on that, Trace, because I said that right in front of you in the last episode, and you didn't catch that. You were literally watching me.
Man, it's such a small thing.
Man, I don't pay attention.
No, I don't. I just space out for half of this.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, I would space out too if I was having to listen to me and I wasn't just having to think. But yeah. And you can find us on Facebook at Musings on Mysteries and Mythical Matrix. Just type that in and you'll find us. If you're listening on YouTube or Spotify, please give us a rating, give us a subscribe, follow, all that stuff to help us get a little bit more traction here. Everything that y'all do helps. Participation helps. I'm the kind of person where I'll scroll through social media and I really won't like any videos. But if you like our content, please support us in that way. Give us likes, subscribes, contact us. The more interaction we get, the better. Just helps us out, helps us keep creating great content for you. So, for those of you listening on the earth, above the earth, or below the earth, we wish you a good rest of your day.
Toodles.